everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the SCRA Tech Startup Lifecycle Series, Episode 2. I'm very excited about the panel of speakers we have today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over first to Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Jess. My name is Andrew. I am sort of a serial entrepreneur. My background is in print, magazines, coffee table books, anything that has the word design in it, I do it. I'm still haven't figured out what I want to do when I grow up. Hope I never do. Happy to be a part of this conversation. My passion is helping small business discover their brand, their voice, and their platform.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason. I spent decades in the Silicon Valley in the startup field. Recently moved to Beaufort and started an incubator with my partner, Andrew Branning. Also run a game development company as well, and happy to be here.
All right, Rich.
Hey everyone, Rich Conte. I'm one of the board members of the Beaufort Digital Corridor, a fairly recent transplant to Beaufort from the Charleston area about 3 years ago. I also host and produce a podcast with the Charleston Digital Corridor called the Charleston Digital Corridor Tech Life Podcast, where we focus stories on tech entrepreneurs, and mainly in the Charleston area. And by day, my role is in product development, product management. I've done that for about 25 years now, particularly in larger companies, but I have a real passion for working with startups and smaller companies, trying to find product market fit and scaling. It helps keep things interesting.
All right, and I am Jess O'Brien. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm the executive director over a tech incubator called the Beaufort Digital Corridor in a beautiful Beaufort by the Sea, South Carolina. So without further ado, we'll get right into the questions. What types of development avenues are most common that you see? Avenues meaning either technical career paths, or I guess that could also be the mediums in which you work.
Jason, you want to start on that? You're the
yeah, sure.
The mobile app giver.
If the question is more from I'm an entrepreneur, I want to build an MVP of something, then I think there's several paths, and it's generally budget based, right? So if you've got several $1,000s to work with, then you're probably going to go to one of the sites that you can find a contractor developer to help you with. If you got a much bigger budget, you could probably either part-time hire or actually, contract with a development team to do that particular implementation. So I think it's mostly budget restricted, right? Depending on where you want to go. And of course, if you raise enough money, you end up hiring a full team with UX designers and QA folks and programmers and product managers and that kind of thing. But I would think for this audience, which is mostly startup folks or even sort of early stage entrepreneurs that have an idea and they want to get something on a screen, it's probably going to be working with a partner. And we see this a lot with universities. They'll find somebody that's in the computer science program, and they'll come together with them and they'll just build something that looks like an MVP. And at least you could show that MVP to various people and get feedback, including folks that may want to actually fund it further.
Yeah, and on the technical front, I don't know if that was a technical question, Jess, or not, but I mean, obviously what's trending is React and, multi-platform languages. We find a lot of people are building on technologies that pigeonhole them into a certain direction or platform. And it's really important, I mean, with the landscape right now with AI and everything that's going on, to really think about where you want to be with this app in a couple of years. So it's important to really understand the technologies that your app requires and how to scale it. Even though those are early conversations, they can impact your MVP, and also from an investment standpoint, having to recode your entire project is not a conversation you want to have. So go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's great, Andrew. I'll piggyback off of that and saying, yeah, I mean, technology moves so quickly that, sometimes, retaining some degree of flexibility in sort of how you expect to go forward and scale is important. And circling back to Jason's point, I think it's because of that, I think it's both funding, dependent, and it's sort of, where you are in the process dependent, and frankly, what your goals as an entrepreneur and what your skill sets are. Some folks come from a technical background, and they may be better suited than anybody to sort of get them to that MVP stage that Jason talked about, so they can test out the product market fit without having to make a huge investment up front. Other folks need that help, and I think probably over the last 10 years or so, as technology startups have become sort of more and more attention's been put on them. I think you found a lot of contract development shops that sort of have recognized that there's a big market for them out there, for organizations or potential organizations that are just getting started. And so rather than sort of the traditional sort of, I remember sort of earlier in my career, a lot of folks went and did contract development for big shops, and these were run very waterfall, fashion. It's get all the requirements detailed up front, and you're going to build this thing that's, heavily operationalized and fully scaled. That's probably not a wise investment for an entrepreneur or a startup that's really just trying to like find product market fit. So I'd say it's really dependent on what your goals are, what your background is, and being able to tune to like make sure you maintain flexibility and actually preserve, maybe push down the road that need to go out for a big investment ask once you've found that product market fit, and now I got to go to that next step, which is scaling and bringing more, folks with more expertise to bear. But Jason's right. Like the goal down the road is you're going to, that's going to be part of your business, is running a product development team. But, there's a lot of steps before you get to that point.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I learned from working with Jason, who has a very deep experience with mobile apps and building very large scale enterprise type of applications, is that a lot of these founders lose sight of what problem they're actually trying to solve. It's very easy to get into the trap of let's add this feature, this feature, this feature. And if there's one thing that Jason taught me is be very careful about those conversations. Stick to what problem you're trying to solve with your app, because we are in a very, when it comes to software development, it's extremely competitive, and there's a lot of already built structure. So you're trying to come in and make a better mousetrap, and it's very easy to get lost in the sauce, as we say. And so, if anything I would tell a founder who has an idea is pressure test your idea, design before you start getting yourself into conversations of infrastructure, code, and all the things that can take you down a path that it's very hard to change and pivot on once you start coding and once you start developing and absorbing those hard costs.
Speaking of the entrepreneur mindset and the idea people, is there a specific recipe for success from someone going to an idea to actual development of their product? Is there any type of secret sauce, if you'd say?
No.
I think there's attributes, right? I think there's a pattern of attributes you see in successful entrepreneurs. I would say, and I think this is a little contrarian, but I think most folks would say it's sort of the brilliant folks that can connect the dots that others can't see. And I would say it's probably not that, right? Because if you ask Rich or Andrew, we see 1,000 ideas every year, right? And then a lot of them overlap, right? So you might think you have the better mousetrap, as Andrew calls it, but we've probably seen some semblance of that before. So the attributes I normally look for is the grit of the founder, right? So I call it passion. Other people's calls it stick-to-itiveness, or just the ability to work through the 1,000 nightmares and cuts that come along with developing software, right? And there's folks that have great ideas, but they just can't get over those 16 hurdles the first month, right? So it's the folks that are going to be the hardest working person in the company, right? Are the folks that no matter what happens, they're going to do this. And one of the litmus tests I think Andrew and I used in our criteria was the founders that we like to work with are the folks that are going to do this with or without us, right? So they're going to make this dream happen regardless of who comes along for the ride, right? That we know those are the folks that have the mindset to get it done. And certainly as an entrepreneur, right, there's going to be times when you just want to quit. And we look for people that just won't quit. In fact, I would almost say it's an unreasonable amount of stick-to-itiveness and an unreasonable amount of optimism, right? We look for folks that most of the folks around them think they might be a little bit crazy, right? Those are the folks that generally are the ones that are going to make it happen when everybody else will quit.
Yeah, I love that, Jason. I was going to go there first too, because the way I think about it, there's going to be, to get to any level of success, even early stage success, at a lower scale, there's going to be many people involved beyond just you, right? And if none of them are going to care about achieving that success as much as you do, and so if you're not out leading with that passion or that grit that you're talking about, it's somebody else isn't going to do it for you, right? You're the one on the line there, in terms of the success of the venture. I like you describing it as attributes. There absolutely isn't a recipe, but I was going to go with the metaphor a little bit more and say there are definitely ingredients, and grit's probably the biggest one. The other one that I'll add, which can be a very hard one for, particularly a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, is falling in love with the problem, not falling in love with your idea. And I think this expands to some of what you were just saying a minute ago, Andrew, in that, your idea is going to evolve and shift, and it sort of has to. I mean, the idea, the notion that you're coming to the table with the optimum solution for a given problem, right? Just the odds against that are astronomical, right? The hard work isn't the idea. The hard work is the execution, and not just the product development, all of the aspects of the execution. And so you've got to be really flexible, but at the same time, hyper-focused on where the value is, and that is what problem you're solving.
Yeah, I think some of the greatest companies in America have been built accidentally. They go in to solve a problem, and then they realize, wait, our customers actually love this. Which I guess, to me, if you to add on to what Jason said, absolutely founder passion is number one. But secondly, it's about having, a customer driven mindset. You have to, you're at the end of the day, you're building a product for an end user, and it's important to understand what that experience is and how the customer is going to interact with it. And ultimately, as founders, we hypothesize about what we think is going to work all the time. And as my good friend Jason here taught me, is it's in the numbers. So, as quickly as you can solve that problem, get that MVP out the door, and actually have metrics that you can have a conversation with an investor and say, no, this is not a hypothesis. I actually have positive user feedback and positive user numbers to show that this does have legs and it is going in the right direction. I feel like Shark Tank, the show on TV, has kind of put people in a mindset of, I'm going to come up with an idea and I'm going to go get $1 million investment, and then I'm going to build a team that's going to build my idea. And unless you're a billionaire, it doesn't work that way. And even people who have the money to do it, it's not the smart move to just throw money at a problem. So I don't want to get too off tangent from your question, Jess, but I think those are kind of some of the traits I see and going on there.
Well, that kind of leads into the next topic of conversation, which is early funding mistakes. What are some things to avoid, any personal experiences of just early fundraising that you wish that you had known or someone had imparted that advice to you?
The first easy access to money is probably friends and family. And I think I've seen a couple folks that have taken advantage of that route, and it's kind of changed the dynamics of their friendships and family relationships. So I think I'd just be really, really honest and transparent with the folks that you're taking money from in your friends and family circle, that the money may just disappear, right? So there's no shame in trying something that you're really passionate about. But there is a little bit of problematic relationships if you burn through someone's savings and you weren't really upfront about the fact that the money could just disappear, right? So friends and family money aside, from a professional money standpoint, be it angels or VCs, at least from what I've seen, and this kind of goes back to the grit statement, is I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't know that you may have to knock on 100 doors before you get 3 folks that you talk to that may be interested in speaking with you about funding. So sticking with the fact that it's a very small number of folks that get funded, in understanding that, I think is a tremendously valuable lesson to learn. So if you haven't knocked on 100 doors and you come to Andrew's and I's incubator and say, can we have some money? I mean, the first thing we say is like, who else did you talk to, right? If you say, you're the third person, then we know that it's probably just a little too early to vet that idea. And I would say maybe the second thing I've seen, and this is in early stages, not so much as at the A round, and usually the A round and B round, you've got a going business and you've got revenue and customers. Sort of the earlier rounds, I think people go in thinking that potentially their company is worth more than it actually is. And I know I'm going to get some bad fan mail because there's great companies that have gone into orbit that were unicorns, and sort of the lesson they learned is they went to the right VC and they held out for the right valuation. But you have to remember, those were folks possibly with track records, right? Or they were folks that were really dialed into that community. But if you're not dialed into that community, you don't have a track record that precedes you, going in and asking for some money at a $5 million valuation when you just have a sketch of something on a PowerPoint slide, right? Can really get you into trouble, right? I think that's kind of the recipe for someone not taking you seriously, right? So if you've got an MVP, that's great. I think that gets you to a certain level of valuation. It's even better if you have what Andrew just mentioned, right? You've got some real metrics from the market that say, yeah, I've only tested this on 1,000 people, but my conversion rates are great. My retention rates are through the roof, right? That speaks volumes to the fact that if I'm an investor, I don't really understand what's happening in your app. That's why I want to invest in you, the founder, right? I don't understand it, but I can see that you do. You've been thinking about this problem for a year, let's say. But the proof's in the pudding. So I don't need to know what's going on the screen if you show me metrics about how the app is performing in the market. And that just says everything, right? If the app is truly in an unbiased test market performing well, then the funding gets a lot easier and the valuations come a lot easier as well.
And also make sure that those 1,000 users are not people that are in your influence circle.
Right.
You know,
right.
make sure they're from the public, right, Jason? It's a pure data set. As we've seen that a couple times being an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think Jason hit all the points there 100%. Rich.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Jason's obviously the closest to that. I will say, a couple of slight tweaks to some of that I've seen, or slight variations from that is, folks taking money, particularly too early, without a clear plan for what they're going to do with it. I think that's where you can quickly get yourself into trouble and unnecessarily burn capital. And, sort of a variation on what Jason was just saying, taking money or having your goals around sort of why you're taking money and how much, too early and not really commensurate with sort of what you've been able to demonstrate so far, because again, that just goes to, I think, not really having a clear path forward and looking at just money to solve that problem for you. You figure out the path forward, then you figure out how you're going to fund it, whether that's bootstrapping or getting friends and family, or you're at that next level and you want to look for a Series A.
The other thing I was just going to add to that is I mean, when it comes to money, it may not be a problem of money. It's never been a better time to be a founder with an idea. Everybody's talking about AI and all these different automations. The power of an individual to create things now has never been better. The education, just turning on YouTube, if you don't know how to do something, learn how to do it. If you're a founder with trying to build an idea, don't let investors stand in the way of that idea. Learn what you need to learn, figure out what you're good at, and then outsource the stuff that you're not. And then let money be the gasoline on the fire. But don't wait for somebody to spark your fire. Make your own fire.
Yeah, there's so many low code and even no code technologies out there that, again, somebody with passion, ingenuity, and some of that grit that Jason was talking about can get an MVP out there and maybe even like get a business off the ground on something that probably won't scale, but is enough to demonstrate some of that track record that you can then, when you're ready and you have a plan for where and how you need to scale, get the funds to do it. I love that, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry about that, Jess. I was just going to build on Rich's point because I think it's a really important one. Is have a pretty good idea on the use of funds, right? And it sounds obvious, but a lot of folks don't talk about it. They go in there and say they need a couple $100,000 to get the company going. But if you turn the page and that $100,000 is actually going to be used for an influencer campaign, and we have no idea how the app performs in a smaller subset, right? We might just be throwing that money away. So I think Rich makes a really great point, which is what do you plan on doing with the money that we give you, right? If it has to do with getting the MVP to a more robust stage, if it has to do with testing to get those metrics, to get to the next stage of funding, I think those are all valid. But there have been folks that just come in and say, I'm working on my pipeline of influencers that are going to promote my app. And that's why I need your $500,000, right? And that is a very scary thought.
Well, let's say someone has already put all their time, energy, resources, all their funding into a project, and it is just not sticking. What point should they know when it's time to pivot?
Oh, wow.
Well, I will say I think that's a gut instinct, that, if you're an analytical person, you may answer that with look at the data and find where the problem is. If you go from an entrepreneurial mindset, that is a gut instinct. You have to know when to pivot, and instinct is going to lead you there, in my opinion. Some people argue that, though, instinct versus analytics.
I think they work hand in hand too.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was thinking about Jesse's question. So the question was sort of framed as if your business isn't going the way you want it to go per plan, when do you think about pivoting? Which is true. I think a lot of businesses make that decision when they're not hitting plan, and they say we're going to force a pivot into something else. There's a couple other scenarios where I think the pivot is merited, and in my mind, I think these are areas where the pivot is actually more justified. Is if there's a technology shift coming, right? Or there's a business model that just makes more sense, right? Not necessarily being forced to pivot, but you look around you and everybody's moving to a subscription model, and you're stuck selling software shrink wrap model, right? So now you move to that superior model. Adobe's done that, right? So I can't now get my Adobe Acrobat for $20 and keep it forever. I've got to pay them $29 to read a PDF or whatever it is, use Photoshop, right? So I think if there's a big technology shift, I think Andrew mentioned one, obviously AI is going to disrupt that landscape. So I already see it in the gaming sector. There's a lot of folks that are making some pivots very fast. And some of them are probably the right bet. Some of them are probably not, but you can see how that's forcing a pivot. I think I don't like the answer too much of if your business is not going well when you pivot. I don't like the question so much, because what it means is that you have license to pivot whenever you think it's not going well, right? So if I'm working with a company and they're on their fourth pivot in 3 quarters, I know something's just not right? There's something deeper that's troubling that's going on, which is probably not solved by a pivot, right? But if you look at companies that change their business model, or companies that even bet on these technology shifts that didn't pan out, I'll give you an example. Gaming companies that shifted because VR hit town, right? So VR was coming and everybody got excited about the technology, was great, but it didn't pan out. There's not a million headsets in this state. So if you made a game and put all your investment into VR for gaming, you would have lost that bet. So I think that's probably the way I would frame it, Jess. I think is you're probably forced to pivot from time to time because of the business situation. But if it happens too often, there's probably just a little too much license inside the executive team to just keep changing course, which is I would say very distracting, right, for the company. If you're moving to a new platform or you're changing your business model, there's a fair amount of thrashing that goes on to make that happen. So you just want to be careful that you don't do it too much and you don't do it prematurely, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to add on to what Jason's saying, I think it's also a question of scale. My background is very different than Jason's, for example. When I hear the word pivot as an entrepreneur, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I don't want to ever be pigeonholed into anything. So if you're out there as a founder and as a small business owner, you pivot constantly, and it needs, I'm probably guilty of pivoting too much. As people who know who I am, I've so many different fields and backgrounds. I don't recommend it, but it's the old adage of fail forward is always stuck with me, and I think as long as you're moving your feet, there's something's going to happen, and it's that never quit mentality. So, obviously, when you're talking about corporations, that's a whole different conversation of management team issues, HR issues, out the wazoo. But in the context of of small scale. I mean, you pivot, and I think the number one thing I would tell founders in that context is you are your brand. If you pivot, if one day you're a photographer and the next day you're a magazine publisher, don't forget who you are. You're not, as a founder, you represent yourself and your own brand. And just because you're changing industries or changing to a different strategy, it doesn't change who you are and the skills that you gain along that path.
Yeah, I think, not all pivots are the same, right? There's so many different dimensions across which, a pivot or an adaptation or an evolution might occur. I think, a common theme, and you never say never, right? There's no absolutes, but to Jason's point, ideally you're pivoting based on opportunity, not based on challenge, right? There's always going to be headwinds no matter what you do. And, it's your job as an entrepreneur to navigate your way through them. And a lot of those are very small corrections that most folks wouldn't necessarily consider a pivot, but some things are going to be bigger. But if it's more driven off of opportunity, like you find actually your core market segment is very different than what you thought it was. In terms of, your solution has value, but not for who you thought it, did. That's a pivot, a healthy pivot, because you've probably done that based on some evidence that you've gathered, rather than just, to Jason's point of, your negative business results that you're trying to turn around in a hurry. So it really goes to like the nature of the pivot and what needs to be tweaked. Some are easier to execute, particularly as you scale. Technology pivots become really, really hard and disruptive, and you probably want to avoid those, or even to some degree prepare for them better by maintaining a degree of flexibility and abstraction in your architecture that makes it easier to do that once you start to scale. But think about where you're going based on opportunity, rather than just being bounced around because something's not working.
Well
Something doesn't work at first attempt.
Yeah, and then build, also to add to what you're saying, Rich, is build off of what your strengths are, right? Oftentimes when you're operating a company, it has a certain lens. Like if you're dominating in the mobile game space, don't jump into enterprise, it's making those calculated changes and jumps. Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, no, that was it. Yeah, I think that was good.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Netflix. I think some of the folks listening to the podcast may not know Blockbuster Video, but Netflix, before they streamed content to your computer, they used to mail you DVDs, right? And I remember when they said they were going to switch to streaming because Wi-Fi had enough penetration, and they said we're actually going to move to digital, and there was a lot of whining and thrashing, and by the way, there was a lot of problems too, because not everybody had great Wi-Fi. So in the early days, Netflix was terrible to watch on Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. And I think just recently they said they're shutting down the entire mailing DVD business, which was surprising because I didn't know they still had that. They're mailing out, I think, 10 random DVDs to everybody that's subscribed to that. But if you think about it, they were in this kind of to Rich's point, they were still in the same business, right? They're delivering content to you. You don't have to go to the store and rent it like the Blockbuster model. They're delivering it to you through the mail. But then they switched it to a new model through technology, which is we're going to actually stream it to you. We're still doing the same thing, but we're digitizing and streaming it through the pipe, right? And he happened to read Hastings went early, right, with that bet. And a lot of folks, including a lot of smart people in the world that had plenty of content, including Disney and others and movie studios, said that that's probably not going to be the future. And it was, right? It really did change the entire industry. And you might even say they pivoted to creating their own content at that point. A lot of people second guess that one, which is Netflix is not a studio. Well, actually, it turns out they are. So there's a lot of bold moves that were probably pivots inside the company, but made sense. And then there's probably a lot of other pivots that didn't go so well, which we won't talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, the brilliance of Netflix is that right from the get-go, they saw that their business was content, even though they, you know, actually becoming a creator was further down the pipeline for them right from the get-go, as opposed to Blockbuster, who saw the business as, well, we got these DVD things, right? We got this media, we'll be the clearinghouse to sell them and to rent them. They saw it as the value is in the content, and let's adapt the business model over time to be more efficient, you know, with their resources and more efficient for us as consumers.
Mhm.
Well, since we have just a little bit of limited time left, I want to ask one final question and give each of you enough time to speak towards it. What is the one piece of advice you received in your career that still impacts you today?
That's an easy one for me. I'll take
Yeah,
it.
go ahead.
I just said it earlier. Fail forward. Don't quit.
Mhm.
It's corny. It's not like you've heard it 1,000 times, but it's never quit, and just have a tenacity, and don't care what people think. That's the other thing. I mean, everybody's every day afraid to jump. You know, they have a job that they hate, whatever they're doing, they're afraid to take the leap because what my family will think of me. What if I fail? What if I do these things? And you know, life is short, and if you can be successful on as a small business owner, or even scale to large companies, and you have an idea, I mean, it's an incredibly rewarding opportunity and experience. I don't sit here today speaking as a billionaire founder. I hope to be one day, but I think that you know, and then also surround yourself with quality people, get involved in co-working spaces, and have a you know, it takes a village at the end of the day, and it takes a lot of different perspectives, and you know, having the ability to change your mind about things is a huge thing, because I run into people all the time and they say, you know, I don't understand Instagram. I don't understand how to, you know, what is React? I mean, you know, spend an hour a week and get on YouTube and Google and learn something new. People are not learning things new at a fast enough pace in life. And, you know, so I think that as founders and as people who want to be business owners, is have a tenacity for learning new things, and realizing that if you're going to come into the technology space, especially, that it changes by the hour, some would say. So if you're not understanding the trends and the technologies, and you know, from a design background, you know, I thought I understood web design, and then you start looking at the guys that are making these incredible websites on awards and all these platforms, and you go, wow, I really don't know what I'm doing. and so it's about having the humility to understand where your skill set is and where you want to be.
Yeah, mine's sort of secondhand advice. The product management mentor of mine, it wasn't an original piece of advice, but it is that there's no answers inside the building. There's only opinions, right? And your job is to go out into the customer base, into the market, outside in the world, and find the answers, you know, to validate those opinions or those hypotheses. And that's something that's, you know, as someone who likes to, you know, solve hard problems and think about them, that was a very hard thing for me to sort of gradually learn to accept, because my natural tendency is, you know, if I think about something long enough, I can find the answer. But no, all I'm finding are you know, hypotheses, and you still need to go out there and validate them in the real world.
I think my advice is sort of a combination of Rich's and Andrew's. Is I remember my old boss, Trip Hawkins, he told me his story of working with Steve Jobs at Apple and growing that company into a public company at the very early stages. And then it became a multi-thousand employee company, and he was doing very well financially, obviously, and his career was going great. But his passion was really about video gaming. And he went into Steve Jobs' office and he said, I think I'm going to go start a video game company. And of course, you know, the story goes, Steve Jobs said he was crazy. Don't do it. You have a perfectly great career here. And he said, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you. And then he went and left and did it. So there's that speaks to the tenacity, I think, and sort of this irrational optimism about, I want to go do this. And then sort of that second thing, the spinoff to that, I think, is based on what Rich said, which is I think you need to be solving a problem that you personally have, right, in your life. When I say problem, it means is the app or the service that you're trying to create must be something that is impacting you. And I'll give you an example. Like if I talk to an entrepreneur and they have a certain game that they want to make, and they're making it because they want to play that game. It doesn't exist, and they think it'd be so much fun to play it. That's probably the right entrepreneurial mindset, right? As opposed to, well, I studied the market and I don't see an RPG that has space aliens and has this, so I'm just going to hire a team and make that game. It's going to make a lot of money. And by the way, sometimes you will. Maybe that strategy works, but from an entrepreneur standpoint, I think you want to solve a problem in your own life. And if you're doing that, you're going to be on the right track. And by the way, if you're doing that also, you're going to stick to it, right? Because no one's going to understand that problem better than you, because you're making that app. There's a fabulous entrepreneur in our portfolio at Dolfin Ventures, and he's making this app for himself. Right. It will scale to others. Obviously, that's why we're supporting him. But he is solving this because he said there's no app that allows us to digitally share music in the way that Spotify's not doing it and Instagram's not doing it. In fact, they're all doing it in the wrong way. We're piecemealing these things together because there's no central app that does it the way I want to do it. And when you hear that vision and you can sense in his voice that he's been thinking about this for years, right? You know that if you want to bet on somebody, it's probably him, because as advisors, and Rich and I know this, right? We're going to help him with product management skills, and Andrew's going to help him with design skills. We will help and support him, but he's thinking about it 24/7, right? Yeah. We're just coming in there, parachuting in and helping him once in a while. He's the one that's got to push that thing over the finish line into orbit. And if he's in that mindset, we know that the person in the room that has the best shot to do it is that entrepreneur.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so very much for joining us today. I think that this was a great talk. How could people reach out to you if they're interested in learning more about your businesses? And just a shameless plug.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more than happy to drop my email into this this video link. Speaking to my comments earlier, my company, Branning Media, and then also working with Jason with Dolfin Ventures, my focus is on marketing and applying technology to small business and small companies. So I'm more than happy to talk to you. If you speak to me, I'm not coming to you from a illustrious, career in technology. I'm coming to you from a guy who just doesn't want to have a normal job. So if you think if you have a career that you don't like right now and you need somebody just to snap you out of it and tell you to go do an idea, I'm probably the guy to talk to. So
yeah, folks can find me on LinkedIn. Always glad to connect there. I'm on Twitter at Rich Conte, Conte. You can follow the Charleston Digital Corridor Tech Live podcast wherever you download your favorite podcast, including this one, or you can find it on the Charleston Digital Corridor website at charlestondigital.com, I believe it is. And any questions on the sort of Beaufort Digital Corridor side, probably best to reach out to Jess directly, but glad to help there as well. Or if you want to reach me just by email, it's rich@nofriction.co.
Oh, wow. I like that. That's cool. And for myself, if you want to reach out to me, I'm just at jason@loia.com. So my first name at my last name.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Jason Loia. But I'm happy to discuss your idea, discuss your development plans, discuss your business model. If you just want someone to be a sounding board, I've seen a lot of companies and would be happy to share any advice I can give you. And if you're in the Beaufort area, of course, stop by the BDC and let's grab a cup of coffee.
Perfect. Well, thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us.